Cave diving's most infamous story, the dead man's handshake. Stick around today to hear the story and the truth behind this legendary event. Between the years of 1976 and 1978, two British cave explorers, Geoff Yeadon and Oliver Statham, were attempting to connect Keld Head, a cave in Yorkshire, England, to another local cave called the Kingsdale Master Cave. Despite making significant progress over the previous years, in early 1978, Statham invited Jochen Hasenmayer to help in the exploration efforts at Keld Head. When Hasenmayer showed up to dive, both Yeadon and Statham were very impressed with his equipment. And rightfully so. On his first dive in the system to familiarize himself, he actually reached the end of the exploration line. Cave divers use lines to track both exploration progress as well as establish navigational routes. Many divers can only dream about seeing the end of an exploration line. For Hasenmayer, this was par for the course. The exploration plan consisted of the three divers all executing individual solo dives, with a half hour in between each one of them entering the water. Hasenmayer entered the water first, followed by Statham, and finally Yeadon. At the point that Geoff Yeadon was starting his dive, Hasenmayer had already been underwater for over an hour. For Geoff Yeadon, the dive went relatively smooth for the first 2,500 feet. At 2,700 feet, he saw a light coming toward him. Yeadon assumed that this was Hasenmayer exiting. However, as the two divers became closer, Yeadon realized that this was Statham. Statham, writing on Yeadon's slate, wrote, "No Jochen? Trouble?" Yeadon replied back on the slate, indicating that he would go look for Hasenmayer. During the 300-foot swim that Yeadon had to make to the point where he would eventually meet up with Hasenmayer, he had to consider the fact that when he got there, Hasenmayer might be dead. At the 3,000-foot penetration point, Yeadon saw Hasenmayer's line running into an extremely small restriction. Unable to enter that restriction himself, he determined that he would wait there for Hasenmayer until he had used up the first third of his breathing gas. In an effort to communicate with Hasenmayer, Yeadon began to tug and pull on the line to see if he could get any type of communicative response back. After a while, he felt some tugs back. Hasenmayer was alive, but somehow he had navigated into a portion of the cave that didn't allow him to exit because the restriction was so small. Appearing to Yeadon's right and realizing that he probably wasn't going to make it out of the cave, Hasenmayer stuck his hand through the very small restriction and gently squeezed Yeadon's hand. Shaken, Yeadon squeezed back, and Hasenmayer brought his other arm through and gently tapped him on the back of the hand, letting him know that it was okay. Hasenmayer eventually disappeared into the darkness, but having his remaining air, Yeadon decided to stay in that portion of the cave with his light to act as a beacon for Hasenmayer should he find his way out. This was a very brave move by Geoff Yeadon, who had heard stories about divers killing each other when one of them was low on air. Even if Hasenmayer was miraculously able to get out of the cave, they still had a 3,000-foot swim back to the entrance. Yeadon eventually saw a light. It was Hasenmayer. He was able to navigate his way out of that very small portion of the cave. Both men completed their exit without any complications. Upon breaking the surface, Yeadon said, "I thought I was shaking a dead man's hand." When asked how much breathing gas he had left, Hasenmayer refused to answer. But that's only one side of the story. After entering the water as Diver 1, Hasenmayer found the dive to be relatively easy. Running his own exploration line, he found a very tight restriction at 3,000 feet that he needed to navigate through. Not only was this section of the cave very narrow and low, but there were no good places to anchor the guideline to establish an effective route. Hasenmayer was able to effectively navigate the very narrow restrictions to get to this section of the cave. However, because he was unable to place his line, the path was effectively changed, and he wasn't able to exit due to how tight the overhead was. As he was exploring, he felt very hard tugs on the line. So hard, in fact, that he recounts it knocking some of his equipment loose. He was eventually able to see Yeadon's light through a very tight section of the cave, so wiggling and pinning himself in this restriction, he was able to reach his arm through and have that immortalized handshake with Geoff Yeadon. However, he was shaking his hand to simply let him know that he was okay. Hasenmayer had no plans of dying that day. At this point, the line was not reflecting the correct route out of the cave, and it had also been caught in a few places. So after resolving that issue, Hasenmayer was, with some time, able to navigate his way back out of that very tight part of the cave the same way that he had entered. He was then able to exit the cave with Geoff Yeadon. Jochen Hasenmayer is a legendary cave explorer who dedicated his life to the exploration of the underwater world. Today, he is 82 years old and unfortunately wheelchair-bound due to a decompression sickness issue that occurred in 1989. However, he is still exploring and passionate about the sport. I hope you enjoyed the video. You've been watching Vince with flippers and goggles. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, and send me all the money in your bank account. Thank you.